Weapon war. You have to remember they've been fighting for 23 years. A lot of the people are...
Of anthrax today at CBS News in New York.
Our biggest problem today is not anthrax. Our biggest problem is fear.
And 2 more cases at postal facilities in Trenton, New Jersey. On Capitol Hill, the House was shut down today. But for Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle, it was business as usual. Or as usual as it could be, the day after 24 of his staffers were found to have been exposed to anthrax. And it didn't stop the junior senator from New York.
We have to recognize that there are very clever, committed adversaries out there who are going to try to take advantage of any vulnerability they see. We're going to be plugging those one by one.
Tonight, carrying on as America fights back.
From ABC News, this is Nightline. Reporting from Washington, Ted Koppel.
As complicated and dangerous as the military mission seemed a few weeks ago, and it is likely, as you will hear a little later, to get more dangerous and more complicated soon, finding and neutralizing Osama bin Laden, his lieutenants, and the armed forces of the Taliban is beginning to seem relatively cut and dried compared to what's shaping up on the home front. The U.S. Post Office, acutely aware of the fact that it's been turned into a weapons delivery system, is sending postcards to all of us, everyone in the United States, instructing us in what we used to take for granted, opening our mail. Republicans and Democrats are still engaged in the warmest display of collegiality that Capitol Hill has seen in years, but in the grip of anthrax anxiety, the Speaker of the House, Denny Hastert, closed that branch of Congress down for the next few days, while Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle opted for the symbolic importance of keeping his side of Capitol Hill in session. You know things are not quite normal here in Washington when strangers approach a television anchorman and, with real concern in their voices, urge him to be careful, to stay safe. It's very kind and much appreciated, but also a little disconcerting. It's not what Washingtonians usually say to my colleagues and me. Another sign of the times, in which television networks seem to be favored targets. Here's Nightline correspondent John Donvan.
Today it was CBS's turn. The network announced its first case of anthrax in an employee, the cutaneous kind, the less threatening kind. And the extraordinary thing was how after several days of this sort of news, the CBS announcement was almost taken in stride. The major networks did not interrupt their programming to report it. The mayor of New York City didn't show up, as he did when anthrax was discovered at NBC and ABC. Today, the whole anthrax scare was feeling less like a crisis and more like a problem that was being managed. It was even in the look of the press conference that CBS called.
I'm Andrew Hayward, president of CBS News. With me
2 men on a stage, sitting in armchairs, sitting in shirt sleeves, and no script to read from.
An employee of CBS News who works here in the broadcast center has been diagnosed with cutaneous anthrax. We've learned a lot about this disease in the last few weeks. She is doing fine. She feels great.
And it's not that this case of anthrax exposure is not being taken seriously. It is. And there were some strong emotions expressed.
We have a two-front war, the war here and the war abroad. In wars, people do bestial, savage things.
But it's just that by now we're getting more familiar with what the implications are. Antibiotics for the victim, who is apparently doing well.
When the NBC case became public, when they and the city deemed it appropriate to make it public, her private physician suggested at that point that it's because she began taking Cipro, and she began taking Cipro at that point.
And they made a point of saying that she never missed a day of work.
We will not flinch. We will not bend. We will not swerve. We will get out a first-class evening news broadcast this evening.
It was that very note that you sensed the nation's leaders also working hard to send today. President Bush went ahead and traveled to an economic summit in China, a way of saying he's leaving the situation in able hands. On Capitol Hill, while it's true that the House remained closed, that's why the flag was not flying, the Senate side remained open for business, even though there was a shortage of space with some of the hearing rooms closed down. Some senators worked out of tiny back offices in the Capitol. Some, like New York's Charles Schumer, worked out of their homes.
Hello, Governor. Governor, how are you?
If we're going to do something, let's do it.
Call it pluck. The Senate Judiciary Committee had a vote scheduled, so its members squeezed into the rarely used, mostly ceremonial and presumably anthrax-free president's room. It felt a little bit like a club meeting.
Mr. Brownback.
While the woman in the red dress conducted the formal vote much less formally than usual.
Mr. Chairman, the votes are 10 yeas, 9 nays.
Meanwhile, from the team of administration officials overseeing Homeland Security, the collective message today seemed to be, everyone just calm down. This was the Surgeon General.
We have plenty of antibiotics to get to those who need them.
This was the Postmaster General.
Yes, we believe the mail is safe.
This was the Chief of Homeland Security trying to put things in some perspective.
Thousands and thousands and thousands of people have been tested for anthrax exposure, and thousands of environmental samples have been taken as well. Yet only 5 people have tested positive at this time for anthrax.
Meanwhile, the Justice Department and the Post Office announced they will pay for information on the people who mailed the anthrax.
We are offering a reward of up to $1 million for individuals who provide the information that will lead to the successful arrest, detention, prosecution, and conviction of the individuals involved.
A new lead may have developed today in that investigation when 2 postal employees in Trenton, New Jersey, where anthrax was mailed, became the 6th and 7th cases of people confirmed to have the disease. Again, it's the cutaneous kind. But one of those people is a letter carrier who picks up mail along a specific route every day. Assuming that she was exposed to the bacteria on that route, it gives investigators a much narrower area to focus on than they had before. I'm John Donvan for Nightline in Washington.
And joining us once again from the Pentagon, ABC's national security correspondent, John McWethy. John, we haven't checked in with you for a few days. Have things changed appreciably on the ground?
The United States maintains that it continues to make progress against the Taliban military, chopping it down day after day, getting it into smaller and smaller pieces. One indication of that is the U.S. has brought in slightly different weapon systems. One of them is the AC-130 Spectre gunship, which can chew up a city block with its 3 guns sticking out of the side of it in a way that no other weapon in the U.S. inventory can. So going after smaller and smaller, finer-tuned targets, Ted.
There have been several end games enunciated. I mean, the simplest, I suppose, is the determination to capture or kill Osama bin Laden and his top lieutenants in al-Qaeda. But beyond that is to create some sort of a government on the ground in Afghanistan that is what?
At least functional in some fashion, a power-sharing arrangement between all the different warring fiefdoms in Afghanistan. The U.S. is working mightily behind the scenes to create this, but they're having a terrible time. We have one small anecdote from the front lines that may help explain sort of what the U.S. is up against. Some coordinates were provided by one of the Northern Alliance chieftains of where he told the United States where the Taliban military should be bombed. When the U.S. checked the coordinates, they realized that it wasn't really the Taliban, but it was one of his fellow chieftains in the Northern Alliance. So this is the kind of thing that the U.S. is up against. They don't like the Taliban, the Northern Alliance leaders, but they hate each other as well. It's going to be a very chaotic situation for the U.S. to work in for a long time.
And is it likely, John, that the U.S. is going to put ground troops into that kind of chaos on the ground?
In very specific circumstances, yes, the U.S. could put some special operations troops on the ground, but only if the intelligence is very, very good, and only if they believe there is a chance they can grab one of Osama bin Laden's lieutenants, a cache of intelligence, or the man himself.
In terms of the Taliban, in terms of al-Qaeda, I mean, they do believe that they've inflicted a lot of damage, don't they?
They say they've inflicted a lot of damage, and certainly the reports from the ground indicate that from ammo storage dumps to fuel to different sorts of barracks used by the Taliban, they have been chewing them up, no doubt about it.
At the very beginning, John, and this will have to be the last question, we were sort of under the impression that the bombing campaign might only last a few days. It's lasted a lot longer than we thought. Why?
It's going to last even longer because they keep finding targets they did not expect to find. In those first days, they knew that there were a certain limited number of targets that they could go after and figured after they had hit those, the game would be over. What happens when you stick a stick into an anthill, lots of things begin to come up. There's been a lot of additional intelligence, a lot of moving parts to the Taliban military, and now they are trying to pick them off one piece at a time.
John McWethy, thanks very much. Tomorrow's Washington Post reports that U.S. Special Forces have now begun operating on the ground in southern Afghanistan, and that more are soon to be deployed. They are reported to be operating in support of CIA efforts to foment rebellion in the ranks of the Taliban. When we come back, we'll take you to what, in this day and age, has to be considered another war front: the offices of Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle.
This is ABC News Nightline, brought to you by IBM.
Democratic Leaders Suite, and I'm here with Senator Tom Daschle, the Senate Majority Leader. Let me draw your attention to a painting over your right shoulder. You may not even have to look at it. FDR, a couple of microphones in front of him, clearly World War II vintage, famous, not quite the fireside chat, but maybe that was one of the fireside chats. Who knows? On radio, we never knew. That was a time of war. This is a time of war, very different though. Does it call for the same kind of rhetoric?
Well, you know, it's interesting you asked that question, Ted, because yesterday as I was speaking to my caucus, I literally came this close to using the phrase, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, because there is so much fear about anthrax and about the disease as it affects all of us and about the unknown. I thought it almost sounded just too artificial. I didn't know if it was of that level or that magnitude for me to use. I didn't feel I had the authority to use it in that context. But it's funny you ask that question, because truly there is, as in any war, a lot of fear. And it's evidenced in so many ways, just as much now as I'm sure it was 60 years ago.
You spoke on the floor of the Senate just a few minutes ago, just before you came in here.
In the past couple of days, members of my staff, who have every right to be afraid, who have every right to take some time and be with their loved ones, have come to talk to me. More than one has told me that they were more proud than ever to show up for work. This attack was meant to undercut that spirit. And what I have seen in the past 3 days is all I need to know that that attack has missed its mark.
Why did that so move you?
Well, I'm inspired by my staff and the way they've responded. You know, we talk about the best in people and how adversity somehow brings it out. I've never seen a group of people who, under the most adverse circumstances, have responded so admirably and with all the right character. And the point I was making on the floor is that that was really what these terrorists were trying to do, destroy our character, destroy that spirit. And they failed. And when I see that reassurance of their failure, of our success in maintaining that American spirit in those young people under these conditions, you can't help but get choked up.
Let me take some mild issue with you over that. So far, I believe one person has died, maybe two, obviously excluding what happened on September 11th. So far, with the use of Cipro, with some good police work and some good fortune, everyone who has been affected has been saved from illness or worse. And this is probably the work of, what do you figure, half a dozen men, a dozen men, a score? If you look at what a very small group of people have been able to do to this country, I don't know of a single time when this Congress has stopped its business as the House has for the next few days. Didn't do it during World War II, didn't do it during the Korean War, didn't do it during the Vietnam War, hasn't, to the best of my knowledge, done it any time in this century. You got to say to yourself, boy, for a very small expenditure, those guys have achieved one whole hell of a lot.
Well, first of all, I guess I think it's premature for us to conclude who did this and how many people were involved. Some have suggested a state could be involved. We don't know, and we're certainly, I'm not making that accusation today, but I am saying that I think it's probably premature to conclude that this is the act of a few men. I would also say that if you were to put Congress next to Pearl Harbor in 1941, my guess is they probably wouldn't have conducted business the next day. I'm not saying this is Pearl Harbor, because clearly we haven't lost anybody. But I am saying that this was the site of the attack. And because we don't know the magnitude of the attack, it isn't calculable right now. We don't know the effect of whatever the attack may have been yet. That isn't calculable. I think it isn't, and because it is so new and so threatening, what we really wanted to do was to take every precaution. Were this to occur on a regular basis, my guess is we'd probably have a regimen, a routine based upon past practice. But we don't have that today. We don't know what this is all about yet. We're making decisions as we go. And I think if we err, I want to err on the side of caution. I thought it was important to find the balance between sending the right message about our resolve and our determination to continue the work of this democracy with the need to ensure the maximum degree of caution and the maximum degree of protection for those directly involved.
When we come back, Senator Daschle explains where he believes the U.S. is losing the propaganda war.
Honey, you know how you say I never open up?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think I'm ready.
Could it wait just a few more days?
You can't afford to miss the last 3 days of Sears Days. Some of our best names at the biggest savings of the season. Only at Sears. Where else?
We Americans are going through a tragic time. We all have painful emotions following these hideous events. Here are some ways to get through this time of crisis. Please ask for help if you need it, and participate in any way you can. Donate money, donate blood, or volunteer. For information, contact your local American Red Cross chapter or visit redcross.org. Together, we can save a life.
Totally new Nissan Altima.
Ask your doctor or pharmacist about Vioxx, a prescription medicine available from your doctor. Or call 1-888-VIOXX22 for information. Vioxx.
Why do you think I should help you?
Take that man down.
We're planning to take over the prison.
The Last Castle, rated R, starts tomorrow.
Circuit City presents Expo 2001. 30 days of what's new, what's hot, and what's next, featuring live demos of HD TV, digital photography, high-speed internet access, and more. All this month at Circuit City. Circuit City, we're with you.
Coming up.
The U.S. Army has now convened screenwriters to offer terrorist scenarios.
The future depends on Hollywood.
Politically Incorrect with Bill Maher.
In light of unprecedented action by General Motors, Buick announces 0.0% APR financing. Now, through October 31st, get interest-free financing on all new Buicks. Every Century, LeSabre, Park Avenue, Regal, and the all-new Rendezvous. Pay no interest, 0% APR through October 31st. Keep America rolling. See your nearest Buick dealer today.
Back once again with Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle. Senator, before the break, I was talking to you about the propaganda war. You think we're winning, losing, holding our own?
I think it depends on who you talk to, Ted. I don't think we're winning it in the Middle East. I don't know that we're winning it in many parts of the third and fourth world today. I think that we've got a lot of work to do. I'm disappointed like everybody else, and I guess I'm probably surprised like everybody else that we don't seem to have our message together. I don't know that we're, and this is no criticism of this administration. I think we could say that for, this isn't just the product of the last couple of weeks. This is something that's been going on for a while. We need to do a better job of
What's
connecting.
that message? I mean, if you had to articulate it now, what is the message that the United States has both to the people who are assaulting some of our freedoms here and to the people who are standing on the sideline and getting ready to pick sides if they haven't already?
Well, it's almost where do you begin, it seems. You could almost pick any facet of what has been the subject of their criticism. They would paint us as anti-Islam, that somehow we are attempting to either contain or even harm in some way the practice of Islam. We're not at all, and I think that somehow has to be articulated a lot more effectively. I think there's a belief that in many cases we are in opposition to not only the governments but the people themselves residing in much of Asia and the Gulf region. That is not the case.
Let me bring you back to your office, to your own people here. A couple of days ago, every major news organization, clearly having been told so by a federal official, was talking about weapons-grade anthrax having been directed against you specifically in your office. What do you know now that you didn't know then? I know you were talking to Tom Ridge just before you and I began talking. Do you have any further information on that?
Well, the information is really more encouraging now than it was initially. I would emphasize, Ted, that no one used the term weapons grade in any of the briefings I was given. That was maybe a term of art that somebody used during one of the press briefings and was automatically repeated over and over. But I can say confidently there was no reference to weapons grade in these briefings.
Was there a sense that it was a more finely milled, a higher grade?
There was a sense that it was finely milled. I don't know enough about anthrax to know just where it falls in the spectrum of quality, but clearly it was high quality. I think the most critical aspect of the reports we've been given, without a doubt, is the word treatable. What they have been able to determine, without exception, without equivocation, is that this anthrax is treatable. Once it's treatable, it really doesn't matter what the size is. It doesn't matter what the micron range is. What matters is whether or not you have the protection. And today I can say confidently we do.
All the members of your staff who were affected, okay?
Well, it means a lot to me to be able to report to you tonight that there have been no reports of infection. The exposure is the only concern that we have yet had to deal with, and we're the farther out you get, as you know, the less concern and less need for concern there is. So I think we are in a strong position. Everyone who was exposed was provided an antibiotic almost immediately. So we have that aspect of the treatment well underway. And while it's never a time when I think you can say we're out of the woods, I think we're getting closer to being out of the woods.
You taking Cipro or
yes,
some
taking
antibiotic?
Cipro.
60-day course?
That's correct.
I'm going to ask you because if you're as smart as I know you to be, you've probably checked with your doctor anyway. There are some possible downsides to taking Cipro for 60 days. And some of the doctors are warning right now that what we may end up doing is producing some bacteria that are resistant now to all kinds of antibiotics that we have. Is this just a matter now of dealing with the problem at hand and worrying about the problem down the road later on?
Well, I guess I'm not going to assume there will be a problem down the road. I think we do have to address the problem at hand, and we know that is a problem. We don't know that there's a problem down the road, so given the two choices, I don't know that there is any choice, really. The direction we've been given is to take the antibiotic as instructed. We're going to do that.
Senator Daschle, I thank you very much.
Ted, perhaps the most delicate element in the president's coalition against terrorism is the deteriorating situation in Israel. This week's assassination of an Israeli cabinet minister has set off another escalation of violence, and the irony is Israelis and Palestinians alike are now adopting the anti-terrorism rhetoric of President Bush.
Hand over every terrorist and every person in their support structure to appropriate authorities.
Listen to the language President Bush used in his speech to a joint session of Congress.
The Taliban must act and act immediately. They will hand over the terrorists, or they will share in their fate.
Now consider today's headline in a leading Israeli newspaper. Israel to Arafat. We will treat you like the Taliban. That threat comes on the same day as the funeral of tourism minister Rahafem Ze'evi. He was assassinated in this Jerusalem hotel by a radical Palestinian group, avenging the August killing of its own leader by Israel. Now Prime Minister Ariel Sharon is demanding that Yasser Arafat's Palestinian Authority arrest and turn over the killers or face the fate of the Taliban. Gillian Findley is ABC's correspondent in Jerusalem.
Ariel Sharon says, just as George Bush gave the Taliban an ultimatum, we have given Yasser Arafat one. Now, if Mr. Arafat fails to deliver, and if Israel strikes as a result, the message to America will also be clear. Our fight against the Palestinian Authority is no different than your fight against the government in Kabul. Don't criticize.
We don't fight a war against Islam or Muslims. We don't hold any religion accountable. We're fighting evil.
President Bush, eager for Muslim and Arab support in his war, has attempted a delicate balance with mixed results. His failure to put such anti-Israel groups as Hamas and Hezbollah on a new list of terrorists provoked Sharon's angry response, comparing it to Europe's appeasement of Hitler in 1938.
Do not try to appease the Arabs on our expense. This is unacceptable to us. Israel will not be Czechoslovakia. Israel will fight terrorism.
The president believes that these remarks are unacceptable. Israel can have no better or stronger friend than the United States.
Washington also complained bitterly to Arafat about those scenes of celebrating Palestinians on September 11th. Arafat's troops cracked down to the point of firing on bin Laden sympathizers. Since then, Prime Minister Blair and President Bush have rewarded Arafat with more open discussion of a Palestinian state.
So long as the Palestinian state recognizes the right of Israel to exist and will treat Israel with respect and will be peaceful on our borders. But
today, the word peaceful was hopelessly out of place. car bomb that killed 3 Palestinians was widely seen as Israeli retaliation for Wednesday's assassination. This afternoon, Israeli tanks threatened more retribution, even as Palestinian Authority officials insisted they, not Israel, would arrest and try any suspects. And both sides adopted the metaphor of Afghanistan.
We're talking about dealing with it immediately, or we'll deal with it. And in that sense, Yasser Arafat's Palestinian Authority is no different than Taliban Afghanistan.
I think that he who is like Taliban movement is Mr. Sharon and his government. They declared a unilateral war against the Palestinian people for the last year.
But now, as the violence spirals out of control, it threatens that other war on terrorism, the one against Osama bin Laden. Martin Indyk is a former American ambassador to Israel.
It will make our task of prosecuting the campaign against terror immensely more difficult. There will be cracks in our coalition with the Arab and Islamic world if Israel has no choice but to respond to escalating violence from the Palestinian side. And that is why it is essential that we move quickly to get Arafat to act against the terrorists, to arrest the assassins, and to get Sharon to respond by holding back and calming the situation down.
Tonight, all is far from calm. Gun battles have left 1 Israeli and 3 Palestinians dead, including a 12-year-old girl. Israel has hinted at an all-out attack if its demands are not met. And the Bush administration is pleading for restraint so it can prosecute that other war. Ted?
Chris Peary, thank you. There is a reason we call it the Coast Guard. That story when we come back.
We took the taste of fresh-baked cinnamon rolls.
May I?
Thank you. And put it in Quaker cinnamon roll oatmeal. Oatmeal so good, you might wonder where we got the recipe.
Reinvented Camry. One look, and you're going to want one.
The best laid plans begin with DuPont Stainmaster Carpet. Because only DuPont Stainmaster has the advanced Teflon repel system, so incriminating evidence won't stick. Backed and warranted by DuPont.
Whole grain! It's energy, and it's Quaker oatmeal, so it stays with Sarah through every story, every year, and every problem she faces. Just another reason to start their day the Quaker way.
Warms you heart and soul.
So many Americans living so far from the terror and still feeling so much anxiety. The war against fear in small-town America, tomorrow on World News Tonight.
Saturday on VH1, the concert for New York City. The world's greatest artists pay tribute to the strength of the world's greatest city.
Mick Jagger, John Mellencamp, Adam Sandler, Harrison Ford, Bon Jovi,
Bono and the Edge,
Backstreet Boys,
Billy Joel,
The Who, Jim Carrey,
David Bowie,
Janet Jackson, Elton John, Eric Clapton, Paul McCartney.
performing in front of thousands of rescue workers who risk their lives to save others. The concert for New York City, live from Madison Square Garden, this Saturday on VH1. Check your local listings.
Freedom should be accessible to everyone. That's why you can now get 0% financing on Jeep Grand Cherokee and Jeep Wrangler. And if you buy now, you'll make no monthly payments for 90 days. And while you can't put a price on freedom, you have to admit it's a pretty good deal. Check one out at your Jeep dealer.
The September 11th attack has forced several law enforcement agencies to redefine their missions. The Coast Guard is no exception. These days, it's back quite literally to what its name says, Coast Guard. Here's correspondent Deborah Amos.
The Coast Guard protects New York's ports day and night. Now, Coast Guard crews board each tanker, each cargo ship. Nearby, fast-moving raider boats are ready to intercept any trouble. And aboard the big cutters, the heavy guns are ready.
We have to maintain a live armed watch. I have at least 2 people at any time maintaining an armed watch.
040.
Gary Smilak, commander of the 270-foot Coast Guard cutter Tahoma, is usually based in New Bedford, Massachusetts. Now, he's on guard on New York's Hudson River.
Inside the Coast Guard, we've had operations, probably World War II is the last time that the Coast Guard maintained such a large presence for port security.
And security for other targets, too. Commander Smilak is on deck as the Tahoma passes by the nuclear power plant at Indian Point, New York, about 45 miles from Lower Manhattan.
Is that a vulnerable plant?
Again, we're not sure what the threat is. I would think anything is vulnerable. I think we were caught off guard in the United States. We don't know how vulnerable we are right now. Everything is a potential threat. We can't be too careful.
Okay. Based on a GPS fix, minute 21 holds you on track. Recommend maintaining course.
They are very careful and well armed, especially now because of the latest FBI warnings about another terrorist attack. The Tahoma is the command and control ship for all Coast Guard operations on the water here. It is $1 million a day operation, a key part of the new Homeland Defense. Giovanni Wade works on radar that can see more than 90 miles away.
And what are you looking for?
More so we're looking as far as any high-speed contacts that would try to come in and sneak into any security zones that we may have.
For example, small boats.
There's just debris laying all over the floor where the explosion hit.
Last Friday was the anniversary of the attack on the USS Cole, the U.S. Navy ship destroyed off the coast of Yemen by men with explosives and a small boat.
I just recently came from a school in Norfolk, and several of my classmates knew people on the Cole, and I've talked to them about things that happened and what they saw and heard, and that's when it really hit me.
The Coast Guard is watching big ships too. Since September 11th, large vessels must give a 96-hour notice before coming into New York Harbor.
Back inside.
The more you have people out there in the force that we have them out in doing what we do and what everybody else is doing, all right, you cut down on the odds of something happening.
John Franco leads one of the boarding teams. Franco, who grew up in Brooklyn, has a personal reason for guarding this harbor.
My personal connection is 2 people that I went to high school with that worked in the towers I lost, and 2 firefighters that I've known who died in the tragedy.
The Coast Guard is also guarding the bridges. New York City has 600 miles of coastline. 4 of the 5 boroughs are on islands. There are many bridges. For a city that benefits from globalization, there is a downside. Global terrorists can take advantage of bridges, borders, miles of coastline.
We are, in fact, moving very quickly to fight the next war, which is going to be very different than anything we've ever fought before.
Bill Bratton is a former New York City police commissioner.
In all of our previous wars, we took it someplace else. Well, it's here, it's on our doorstep. Going to take a great adjustment, and as the Coast Guard is doing, that everybody's going to have to start planning to fight this new war.
An adjustment, too, for all these organizations, the New York City Police, U.S. Customs agents, airport security, the National Guard.
What do you got in the back?
Agencies that have never worked together or trained together. The system is not running smoothly yet.
In the short term, they're enhancing security, certainly psychologically and as a deterrent, but from an operational standpoint, it's a mess. Who's in charge? Nobody really seems to know, and I know local law enforcement is very frustrated by that.